We are now in week 2 of our 3-week book series. We're diving into this amazing book, The Amen Effect, Ancient Wisdom to Mend Our Broken Hearts and World by Rabbi Sharon Brous. It is just astonishingly beautiful. And you don't have to read it in order to, enjoy this series. And I highly recommend to read it or listen to it. It is packed with wisdom. This book reminds us of the potential power of open-heartedness and the sacred encounters that we have, that we get to have. And as Rabbi Sharon writes, how showing up can awaken us to one another's humanity and our own and help us to build more compassionate, resilient communities and more purposeful and meaningful lives. And this is really what this series is about. So last week, my talk, The Holy Work of Not Running Away, we unpacked together the holy and sacred power each one of us has to support those in pain, to not avert our eyes or cross the street, but to take a breath and recognize that we are seeing the divine right in front of us, and to remember this especially when we know that they are in pain. We talked about the healing power of bringing the casserole, as it were. And you were invited to do that in whatever way makes sense for you. How we have all been placed here as angels for one another. This book is filled with that theme, and it is so deeply resonant and germane to this life that we are all living. We also talked about how just a simple act of kindness that we choose to engage in is really actually God or Spirit working through us. That when we say yes to supporting another person, however big or small, that we are saying yes to the divine. And when we can make this connection a conscious one, that God is working through us, that every one of us, every single one of us is a vehicle for Spirit to work through, we begin to connect the dots and live into the reality that no matter what side someone is on, whether it be war or a political party, we begin to deeply see and moreover know that divinity is in every single person, and that in reality there is only one side. It's the side of our humanness. And in this, it changes our posture in the world, because this creates the spaciousness for more compassion and therefore ultimately more peace. So, what are you waiting for? No, seriously, that's my talk title today. What are you waiting for? So the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught that the most important human experience is the recognition that something is asked of us. Something is asked of us. And getting in touch with this idea is deeply profound, and it is connected to our own purpose and mission for being here on earth at this time. So Rabbi Sharon tells this story in her book about gathering with her beloved community by the ocean for an annual ritual called Tashlich, when Jewish people go to a body of water during the holy days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and symbolically cast away any baggage that they don't want to carry with them into the new year. It's a beautiful, beautiful ritual. And Rabbi Sharon, this particular year, invited her congregation to use their time here on earth, on the planet, with greater intentionality. And so she then invited everyone to ask themselves what was keeping them from connecting with their own purpose. And she passed around cards and markers and asked one simple question. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? She gathered the cards, and then later that night she read them with astonishment. Several people, more than she could imagine, wrote that they were waiting for someone to tell them that they were beautiful. 3 people were waiting for someone to tell them to write a book. Someone really wanted them to encourage them to start their own band. More than a dozen wrote that they wanted to be told they were worthy of love. A few were specifically waiting for their parents to say they loved them, even though they hadn't turned out the way their parents had dreamed. Some were waiting to not be so sad or feel so lost. Others for the chance to really make a difference. A few were waiting for the day they'd wake up and just work and live and love without being paralyzed by self-doubt. One was waiting to forgive himself for his friend's suicide. All that waiting, just waiting for someone to invite them to become themselves, to give them answers, someone outside of themselves to free them. You know, this reminded me how important it is for us, no matter where we are on our spiritual journey, to gently ask ourselves, am I seeking outside validation in any area of my life? Anyone? Am I operating from an unconscious place of fear or guilt? Anyone? And then we get to get curious and with great compassion go about naming that to transcend it, feeling that to heal it, bringing your conscious awareness to it so that next time you notice that need for outside validation or guilt or fear bubbling up, you can recognize it for the false belief that it is, and in the moment, compassionately make a radical decision to shine some light on it so that it no longer has any power over you, so that you can see it for what it is, and so that you can ever so gently pop the air out of that particularly destructive balloon. It's hot air anyway. I promise you. Friends, it holds no power unless you give it power. So, back to the story. A few days later, when the community gathered for Yom Kippur, Rabbi Sharon wrote that she wanted to reach out and hug them all. She wanted to say, you really need to start your own band. The world needs your music. We need your music. She wanted to say, you are worthy of love, you and your tender heart. And your friend's suicide is not your fault, and your guilt is keeping you from grieving his death. Instead, do something to make his memory a blessing. And even if your family never accepts you, I do. This community does, and God does, just the way you are. So once again, my question for you, my friends, is what are you waiting for? And is it at all possible that what you might be waiting for is somehow connected to outside validation in some way, or guilt or fear in some way? And what on God's green earth is spiritual about that? Nothing. Nothing. The God of my understanding is a loving God, is a God that gives, is an energy field, a spirit that only wants for you to feel its ever-giving, everlasting, unconditional love. You, my friends, are holy just as you are. You are sacred just as you are. You are divine just as you are. and you are profoundly loved just as you are. Just as you are. So, if you've been around a while, you may have heard me share this. It's one of my favorites. Zuzia was a Hasidic rabbi living in Poland in the 18th century, and he was afraid to die. He confided this to his students, and his students were absolutely stunned. "But you're pious and humble and wise," they said. "You've lived a meaningful and righteous life. What do you have to be worried about?" And Zuzia shared that he had had a vision, and in this vision, he was not asked, "Why weren't you Moses leading your people out of slavery?" Or, "Why weren't you Joshua leading your people into the promised land?" Instead, he was asked, "Zuzia, why weren't you Zuzia?" We are all here to be exactly who we are. And that is more than enough. It is more than plenty. It is magnificent. I want to plant the seed for you for next week. For the final talk in this series, we get to look at writing a new story for ourselves and the healing power of that. We'll dive into this even more deeply. This week, I invite you to just consider, just notice when you might be looking outside of yourself for validation, waiting to do the thing until somehow you are validated in some way. So just consider that this week. And it doesn't matter if you are 18 or 118. We are constantly being asked to lean into the truth of who we are and then to be of service from that place in whatever way is authentic for us. So this holy work of ours, my friends, it takes gentleness and compassion, and so I invite you to proceed with great care, tending to your very precious heart. Khalil Gibran wrote, "Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the self-same well from which your laughter rises was oftentimes filled with your tears." I've always thought it was an extraordinary thing that sometimes when we are in the depths of sadness and grief, we begin to laugh. Do you know what I'm talking about? You're on your knees in grief and somebody says something or something happens and it strikes you as the funniest thing and your tears turn into rings of laughter. And by the very same token, those moments of enormous joy, just the incredible joy and laughter, and something happens, something is triggered, if you will, and it turns into tears. Do you know what I'm talking about? As human beings, it is our natural state to be in balance. I know this seems odd in those moments when our tears turn to laughter and our laughter turn to tears, but that is a sign of our deepest humanity. It's also a sign that there is something unhealed or unexamined within us. And in that moment, that sacred moment, the wisdom of our body temple lets us know this is something for you to look at, my darling, if you choose. If you choose. Our inner wisdom will point through our tears and laughter what is wanting to be known on the deepest level. And often it is in those moments that are the greatest awareness for us. And the reality is, the times that we are living in right now require that we practice self-care, and in particular, by ensuring that we have balance in our lives. In New Thought, we consider balance to be a divine quality. Think of it like with a capital B, Living in balance means living in alignment. So there's this beautiful chapter. Well, they're all beautiful chapters in this book, but this one particular chapter struck me. It's called Grieve and Live. Grieve and live. And it reminds us that even in the deepest suffering, there is still joy. That is balance. And even in the greatest joy, there can still be heartache, and that too is balance. There is such an onslaught right now of challenge and difficulty in the world, and at the very same time, there is extraordinary beauty and courage and grace that is showing up in our humanity. We are being asked to hold a lot, my loves. And I believe we can do this. Understanding that part of our spiritual work here as angels for one another is to cultivate this spiritual practice of balance, of alignment, to excavate those places within us that are yet unhealed, to explore those places within us that are coming up that feel a little bit out of balance, you know? That's your wisdom, saying, my darling, look at this. Look at this. Anybody get furious with the news or the TV? Or start sobbing at a commercial? Or laughing a little too loud at a joke because you just need to? That's a sign that there's an opportunity for deep, deep healing, for deep awareness. Reverend Otis Moss, the senior pastor at Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, tells a story of when he and his church were under attack some years ago. They were receiving dozens of death threats every week, saying things like, we're going to kill you, and we're going to bomb your church. It was terrifying for him. It was terrifying for their community. It was terrifying for his family. At the time, he was a new preacher. He was a young father, and the situation was very dire. And as Rabbi Sharon tells it, one night he was awakened by a noise in his house, and with trepidation, he got up to see what was going on. He peeked into his daughter's room, and he described it like this. There was my young daughter, Michaela, dancing in the darkness, just spinning around and saying, look at me, Daddy. I said, Michaela, you need to go to bed. It's 3 a.m. You need to go to bed. But she said, no, look at me, Daddy, look at me. And she was spinning, barrettes going back and forth, pigtails going back and forth. He said, I was getting huffy and puffy, wanting her to go to bed. But then God spoke to me and said, look at your daughter. She is dancing in the dark. The darkness is all around her, but it is not in her. What a glorious reminder for all of us. For all of us. There may be challenges and difficulties around us, but that challenge and that difficulty does not have to be within us. If it is, please see a therapist, a doctor, a practitioner. But you know what I'm saying? The darkness, the challenge, the difficulty around us does not have to get lodged and stuck within us. So, if this happens, the first thing to do is dance. Dance. That's for you, Aunt Jody. She taught me how to dance when I was probably Michaela's age. Seriously, though, choosing joy is often a revolutionary act. It is a conscious decision. Please remember that. Take a joy break. Doesn't that sound good? In order for us to have balance with all that is happening right now, as people of faith, as people who are on this path of unconditionally loving, especially those who are difficult to unconditionally love, I highly recommend taking a joy break. So what are you doing for your joy right now? I ask you, seriously, consider, what are you doing? What are you consciously creating? How are you consciously creating joy in your life? Put it on your calendar. Seriously. Because yes, of course we have spontaneous moments of joy when we are gathered here together on Sunday mornings, online, our online community. Of course there's joy. But I'm talking about calendaring specific joy breaks, whatever that is for you, and it'll be different for everyone. So what can you do to mindfully bring joy into your life this week? And I'll give you a hint, it is not complicated. It does not need to cost a dime. Know that. However, it does need to be a conscious choice. It needs to be a conscious choice. And if you find that difficult to bridge, if you find that difficult to do, again, I would just from my whole heart invite you to seek out a therapist or a practitioner or a trusted friend who can support you in this. Rabbi Sharon writes, cultivating hearts that can hold both sorrow and celebration is deep spiritual work. Cultivating hearts that can hold both sorrow and celebration is deep spiritual work. Do you see? Our joy is spiritual work. In the same way that here in this community we teach to meditate and pray, we practice gratitude, I'm inviting us to practice conscious joy. Are you with me? Yeah. We can hold sorrow and joy at the same time. We're grown-ups. We can do that. We can teach younger generations that, dear Melanie and Patrick and baby Jem. We can make this our regular practice so that the next generations grow up knowing that joy is their birthright. It's not a byproduct of what happens with the people around you. If joy happens with the people around you, then you are placing your validation outside of yourself. Do you see that connection? Oh, dive in. Dive into the joy that is your birthright, beloveds. I invite you into this week.